At exactly 6:12 p.m., 11-year-old Tyson Cox stood outside a small neighborhood pharmacy in Cleveland, clutching a worn brown envelope so tightly that its edges had begun to tear. Inside were crumpled dollar bills, rolls of coins, and a handwritten note that read, "Mom's Medicine." He was $5 short. When a black SUV pulled up, Tyson gathered every ounce of courage he had. "Sir, could you spare $5 so I can buy medicine for my mother?" he asked quietly. The wealthy stranger didn't reach for his wallet. Instead, he stared at the envelope and asked, "Did you earn every single dollar in there yourself?" Tyson's answer would change far more than either of them could imagine. "Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from, and what time it is in your part of the world. And if stories about courage, kindness, and second chances mean something to you, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next journey." Long before anyone saw Tyson Cox standing outside a pharmacy, asking a stranger for $5, there had been a small apartment where dignity survived on almost nothing. Apartment 3B sat at the end of a narrow hallway in a weathered brick building on the east side of Cleveland. The radiator knocked through winter nights, the kitchen faucet dripped no matter how tightly it was turned, and every window frame let in a little more cold air than it should. Yet every Saturday morning, the apartment smelled of fresh pancakes, cinnamon, and coffee that Grace Cox brewed, even when she barely drank any herself. She liked the apartment clean. Not because it was beautiful, because she believed people should never let hardship decide who they were. Grace often smiled whenever Tyson apologized for wishing they lived somewhere bigger. "A home isn't measured by square feet," she would tell him, while folding the same faded blue kitchen towels she had owned for years. "It's measured by how people treat each other inside." Tyson never forgot those words. Grace had spent almost 12 years working as a certified nursing assistant. She had lifted patients heavier than herself, worked overnight shifts that stretched into 16-hour days, and comforted strangers during the final hours of their lives. She loved taking care of people. She never became wealthy. She barely earned enough to cover rent, groceries, and Tyson's school supplies. Still, she never complained. Then everything changed within a single year. A heart condition forced her to miss work repeatedly. What began as occasional chest pain slowly became exhaustion that even sleep couldn't erase. Walking upstairs left her breathless. Carrying grocery bags became almost impossible. Eventually, her employer had no choice but to replace her. Grace understood. She didn't blame anyone, but losing her job also meant losing the health insurance she had depended on. The irony never escaped her. For years, she had cared for sick people. Now she couldn't afford to care for herself. Tyson was only 11, but children often understand more than adults realize. He noticed the unopened envelopes on the kitchen counter. He noticed his mother's medicine bottles lasting longer than they should. He noticed she quietly cut her pills in half when she thought he wasn't watching. One evening, he finally asked, "Mom, are you taking less medicine?" Grace looked at him for several seconds before forcing a smile. "I'm taking exactly what I need." It wasn't a lie. She simply believed Tyson needed food more than she needed another pill. Every morning, Grace woke before sunrise, even though she no longer had a job. She insisted on making Tyson breakfast herself. Usually scrambled eggs if they had them, toast if they didn't. Oatmeal when payday seemed very far away. She always packed his lunch in the same blue plastic lunchbox she had bought at a thrift store years earlier. Sometimes it held a turkey sandwich, sometimes peanut butter, sometimes only crackers and apple and a handwritten note folded into a tiny square. Tyson collected every note. One read, "Kindness costs nothing." Another simply said, "I'm already proud of you." His favorite note had only 4 words. "Finish what you start." Grace repeated that sentence almost every day, whenever Tyson struggled with homework, whenever he wanted to quit practicing basketball, whenever he became frustrated fixing something around the apartment. Finish what you start. Those words became something much bigger than advice. They became the way he measured himself. After school, Tyson hurried home instead of lingering with classmates. He knew his mother would pretend she was fine. He also knew pretending required energy. When he opened the apartment door each afternoon, Grace always greeted him with the same smile. "How was school?" she asked before mentioning anything about herself. Tyson answered honestly every time. He told her about quizzes, classmates, teachers, funny moments at lunch, and books he borrowed from the library. He avoided talking about friends inviting him to birthday parties that required gifts they couldn't afford. Grace understood anyway. Sometimes silence told parents everything. On Fridays, they reviewed their expenses together. Grace spread receipts across the kitchen table. Rent, electricity, water, groceries, bus fare. Every dollar had a purpose. Tyson watched carefully. Instead of hiding money problems, Grace taught him how budgets worked. "If you respect every dollar," she often said, "you'll never let money decide your character." One evening, Tyson noticed an unpaid medical bill tucked beneath the others. The amount made his stomach tighten. He quietly pushed it back underneath the stack. Grace pretended not to notice. Neither wanted to embarrass the other. A week later, the family doctor examined Grace and frowned while reviewing new test results. Her lungs had developed an infection. Combined with her heart condition, delaying treatment would be dangerous. He prescribed medication immediately. Grace thanked him politely. Then she folded the prescription and slipped it into her purse without looking at the price. She already knew. Medicine rarely became cheaper just because someone couldn't afford it. Outside the clinic, Tyson noticed her unusually quiet expression. "Everything okay?" Grace forced another smile. "It will be." She always believed tomorrow deserved hope. That evening, Tyson waited until Grace fell asleep on the couch with a blanket over her shoulders. He quietly opened her purse. Not because he wanted to invade her privacy, because he wanted to understand. He found the prescription. He found the estimated pharmacy cost, $47.82. He counted every dollar in the apartment. Coins from a ceramic jar, loose bills inside kitchen drawers, the emergency $20 bill Grace refused to touch, his own birthday money. Everything together barely reached $40. Tyson stared at the total for a long time. He didn't cry. He didn't complain. Instead, he walked to his bedroom and searched through his school supplies until he found an old brown mailing envelope. The corners were bent. One side had faded, writing from its previous use. He carefully turned it over. Using a dull pencil, he slowly printed 3 words across the front. Mom's medicine. The letters weren't perfectly straight, but they were written with absolute determination. He placed every dollar they could spare inside. Then he folded the envelope shut. Standing beside his bedroom window, Tyson looked out over the parking lot below, where old cars sat beneath flickering streetlights. He whispered something his mother couldn't hear. "I'm going to finish this." The next morning would become the first day of a journey neither of them could have imagined. And before that journey ended, one worn, brown envelope would carry far more than coins. It would carry hope itself. The next morning, Tyson woke before his alarm. Outside the apartment window, dawn had barely begun to wash away the darkness. The parking lot below glistened from a night of light rain, and the old maple tree outside Building 3B swayed gently in the cool September breeze. For a few seconds, he simply watched his mother sleeping on the couch. Grace had insisted on giving him the bedroom ever since he was 6. "I'm more comfortable out here," she always claimed. Tyson knew that wasn't true. The couch left her back sore every morning, but she refused to let him feel guilty. He quietly walked into the kitchen and found the prescription exactly where she had hidden it beneath the fruit bowl. The folded paper had become soft from being opened and closed so many times. $47.82. He whispered the number again. It no longer sounded like a price. It sounded like a mountain. Grace stirred awake as he poured cereal into 2 bowls. "You should have slept another hour," she said softly. "You always tell me early birds get more done." She smiled. "I did say that." She tried standing, but dizziness forced her to grab the edge of the counter. Tyson pretended not to notice. She pretended nothing had happened. That silent agreement hurt both of them. After breakfast, Grace kissed the top of his head before he left for school. "Remember," Tyson finished the sentence before she could. "Finish what you start." She nodded proudly. "I knew you'd remember." School felt longer than usual that day. During math class, Tyson found himself calculating something completely different from fractions on the board. If he collected 20 aluminum cans, if each one earned about 5 cents, if he could cut 2 more lawns, if Mr. Harris still needed help unloading trucks on Saturday, every possibility became another small piece of the $47.82. When the final bell rang, dozens of students hurried toward buses or waiting parents. Tyson walked in the opposite direction. Instead of heading home, he stopped behind the football stadium where recycling bins overflowed after last night's game. He pulled on a pair of old work gloves he kept inside his backpack. Some classmates had laughed when they discovered why he always carried gloves. He never answered them. For nearly 40 minutes, Tyson sorted through cans and plastic bottles, rinsing sticky soda from his hands whenever he found a working outdoor faucet. By the time he finished, 2 garbage bags bulged with recyclables. The recycling center paid little. But little was still something. The elderly employee behind the counter knew Tyson by name. "Back again?" "Yes, sir." The man weighed the bags. 19 pounds. He counted coins into Tyson's hand. $3.12. "Working hard as always." Tyson smiled politely. "Thank you." He didn't explain why. He slipped every coin into the brown envelope. The sound of metal against paper somehow made him feel hopeful. His next stop was Mrs. Alvarez's small house 3 blocks away. Every Wednesday, she paid neighborhood kids to water flowers, pull weeds, and sweep leaves from her porch. She opened the front door before Tyson even knocked. "I was wondering if you'd come." For nearly an hour, Tyson worked carefully around her flower beds. When he finished, Mrs. Alvarez handed him $10. Then she reached into her purse again. "And here's another 5. Tyson immediately stepped back. "I only worked an hour." "You worked very hard." "I know." "So take it." He looked down at the extra bill, then gently shook his head. "I can't." Mrs. Alvarez frowned. "Why not?" "Because I didn't earn it." She studied the boy standing on her porch. His shoes were worn. His backpack zipper had been repaired with a key ring. His gloves were patched twice. Yet he refused money that wasn't honestly his. Instead of arguing, she smiled warmly. "Then you'll have to come back next week." "I will." He accepted only the $10. As he walked away, Mrs. Alvarez quietly wiped tears from her eyes. Some children asked for more. This one insisted on less. Late that afternoon, Tyson stopped by the small grocery store on East 79th Street. Mr. Kim, the owner, often needed someone to return shopping carts scattered across the parking lot. Tyson lined them up one by one, pushing long, rattling rows through the crisp evening air. The work left his arms aching. When he finished, Mr. Kim handed him $6. "You've earned this." Tyson thanked him sincerely. Again, every bill went straight into the brown envelope. He never mixed that money with anything else. Not for snacks, not for school supplies, not even for the pair of sneakers he desperately needed. The envelope had only one purpose. That evening, Tyson spread everything across the kitchen table. Bills, quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies. He counted once, then again, then a third time. $42.82? He stared at the total, exactly $5 short. He closed his eyes. $5. For some people, it disappeared inside a cup of coffee. For others, it slipped unnoticed beneath couch cushions. For Tyson, it stood between his mother and the medicine she needed. Grace walked slowly into the kitchen, carrying a mug of warm tea. "What are you working on?" Tyson quickly gathered the money back into the envelope. "Just homework." She smiled, unconvinced. "You've never hidden homework from me." He looked down. "I'll tell you when I'm finished." Grace reached over and gently squeezed his shoulder. "I trust you." Those 3 words almost broke his composure. After she returned to the living room, Tyson opened the envelope one last time before bed. The paper had already begun to soften from being opened so often. One corner had torn slightly. He carefully reinforced it with a strip of clear tape. As he smoothed the tape with his thumb, he remembered his mother's favorite sentence. "Finish what you start." He whispered it aloud. "I'm almost there." The following afternoon, he tried one last time. He knocked on the apartment door across the hall. An elderly neighbor answered. Tyson politely asked if there were any chores he could do. The man apologized. "I wish I had something for you, son." The next apartment wasn't interested. Neither was the woman walking her dog outside. By sunset, Tyson had earned nothing more. He stood alone beneath the flickering parking lot light, looking at the brown envelope in his hands. $42.82. Still $5 short. He could wait another day, maybe 2, but every cough he heard from his mother reminded him time wasn't on their side. He looked toward the distant lights of the neighborhood pharmacy. Tomorrow, he decided he would go anyway. He didn't know how. He didn't know who might listen. He only knew one thing. He had finished everything he could do on his own. The pharmacy sat on the corner of Euclid Avenue and East 105th Street, its green neon cross glowing against the gray September sky. By the time Tyson Cox arrived, it was nearly 5 o'clock. Rush hour had begun. People hurried in and out, carrying prescriptions, grocery bags, and steaming cups of coffee. Some glanced at the young boy standing outside with a worn backpack and faded sneakers. Most never looked twice. Tyson tightened his grip on the brown envelope inside his jacket. The paper had softened from days of being opened and closed. The pencil words across the front had begun to fade. "Mom's medicine." He took a slow breath before pushing open the pharmacy door. A small bell chimed overhead. Warm air smelling faintly of rubbing alcohol and fresh paper wrapped around him. Behind the prescription counter, Emily Parker looked up from her computer. She recognized Tyson immediately. She had seen him 2 days earlier when Grace's prescription had first arrived. At the time, she had quietly hoped someone in the family would find the money before the medication became urgent. "Hi, sweetheart," she said gently. Tyson walked to the counter and carefully removed the folded prescription from his backpack. "I'm back." Emily offered a hopeful smile. "Were you able to get everything together?" Tyson nodded without speaking. Then he placed the brown envelope on the counter as though it contained something priceless. In his eyes, it did. Emily opened it carefully. Instead of handing her a stack of bills, Tyson slowly poured its contents onto the counter. Dollar bills flattened from countless folds, quarters polished by years of passing from hand to hand, nickels, dimes, pennies, even a few dollar coins. Customers waiting nearby glanced over. Some looked curious, others impatient. Emily didn't rush. She counted every coin one by one. Tyson watched silently, twisting the sleeve of his jacket around one finger. He already knew the answer. Still, he hoped maybe, just maybe, he had counted wrong. Emily finished once, then counted again. Finally, she looked up. Her expression told Tyson everything before she spoke. It's $42.82. He nodded quietly. I know. Emily swallowed. The prescription is $47.82. I know. $5. Such a tiny amount, such an impossible distance. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Emily lowered her voice. I wish I could let you take it. Tyson looked toward the white pharmacy bag, already waiting on a nearby shelf. His mother's name was printed neatly across the label. So do I. Emily glanced toward the pharmacist supervising the evening shift. Company policies were strict. Every prescription had to be paid in full before leaving the building. Inventory was audited daily. There were cameras above every register, no exceptions, not even for a little boy. She leaned closer. I've asked before. Tyson blinked. What? I asked if we could create a fund for families who were just a few dollars short. What happened? Emily gave a sad smile. They said rules have to be the same for everyone. Tyson lowered his eyes. He wasn't angry. He understood rules. His mother had taught him that rules often existed for good reasons. It still hurt. Emily carefully slid every coin back toward him. I'm so sorry. Tyson immediately shook his head. No. She looked confused. Please leave them there. What do you mean? If someone helps me later, I don't want to count everything again. Emily felt something tighten in her chest. The boy hadn't given up. Not yet. Instead of packing the money away, he believed the missing $5 might still appear before closing time. She glanced at the clock. 5:07 p.m. The pharmacy closed at 6. Less than an hour remained. I'll keep everything right here, she whispered. Aunt. I promise. Tyson smiled gratefully. Thank you. He stepped back outside. The cool evening air felt colder than before. He stood beside the front window where he could still see the brown envelope resting on the counter. Every few minutes, someone entered the pharmacy. Every few minutes, someone left carrying medicine. Tyson wondered how many of them knew how fortunate they were. He wasn't jealous. He only wished his mother could be one of them. At 5:16, an elderly man emerged carrying a prescription bag. Tyson considered speaking. The words almost reached his lips. Then he remembered Grace's voice. You never ask for what you haven't earned. He stayed silent. At 5:24, a woman pushing a stroller stopped near the entrance. She smiled politely at Tyson before hurrying inside. He almost asked her. He couldn't. At 5:31, a delivery driver parked near the curb. Another opportunity. Another silence. Each minute made the pharmacy lights seem brighter and the sidewalk darker. Inside, Emily kept looking through the window every chance she had. She wished she could simply reach into her own wallet. She had done exactly that before, for elderly neighbors, for veterans, for a young father who came up $3 short. But things had changed. A regional audit the previous month had resulted in new policies. Employees could no longer personally pay for prescriptions while on duty. Management believed it created legal complications and accusations of favoritism. Emily hated the rule. Today she hated it more than ever. She watched Tyson sit on the bench outside. He never begged anyone. He never chased passing strangers. He simply waited. The brown envelope remained inside. Hope remained outside. At 5:42, Tyson quietly stood again. He looked through the pharmacy window one last time. Emily met his eyes. She gave him the smallest nod she could manage. She wasn't promising anything, only reminding him she hadn't forgotten. Tyson nodded back. Then he turned toward the parking lot. Headlights swept across the pavement as cars came and went. Luxury sedans, pickup trucks, old compact cars, delivery vans, one after another. None stopped for him. The sky deepened into shades of orange and blue. Streetlights flickered on. Traffic thickened. Tyson looked at the pharmacy clock through the glass. 5:51. 9 minutes left. His heart beat faster. He thought about Grace sitting alone at home. She had probably made soup for dinner, even though she barely had the strength to stand. She would ask whether he'd finished his homework. She wouldn't ask about the medicine. Not because she didn't care, because she didn't want him carrying the burden. But he already did. A cold wind swept across the parking lot, carrying dry leaves against the curb. Tyson hugged his jacket tighter. Then, just as he lowered his head in quiet disappointment, a long black SUV turned slowly into the pharmacy parking lot. Unlike the hurried customers before, the driver parked carefully near the entrance. The engine fell silent. The rear passenger door opened. A tall man in a charcoal overcoat stepped onto the pavement. His polished shoes reflected the fading evening light. The driver remained beside the vehicle while the man looked toward the pharmacy entrance. Tyson had never seen him before. He had no idea the stranger owned one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country. He only knew one thing: the pharmacy would close in less than 10 minutes, and this might be his very last chance. The man closed the door of the black SUV with quiet precision. Nothing about him suggested he was in a hurry. His charcoal overcoat fit perfectly, despite the cool evening breeze, and silver threads at his temples caught the last rays of sunlight. A leather briefcase rested in one hand, while the other remained tucked inside his coat pocket. Tyson watched him walk toward the pharmacy entrance. 5 steps. 4, 3. If he stayed silent now, the doors would close in minutes. The medicine would remain on the shelf. His mother would spend another night coughing until she couldn't sleep. His heart pounded so loudly he barely heard the traffic behind him. He stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir?" The man stopped. He turned slowly, surprised to find a young boy standing several feet away. His expression wasn't irritated, only curious. Tyson swallowed hard. His mother's words echoed inside his mind. Never ask for what you haven't earned. But this wasn't for him. He took one more step. "Sir." His voice trembled, despite his best effort to steady it. "Could you spare $5 so I can buy medicine for my mother?" The parking lot seemed to fall strangely quiet. The driver standing beside the SUV instinctively looked toward his employer, expecting the familiar response that usually followed strangers asking for money. Instead, the older man said nothing. He simply studied Tyson's face. There was no rehearsed speech, no exaggerated sadness, no outstretched hands, only nervous eyes trying very hard not to look desperate. "What medicine?" the man finally asked. Tyson pointed toward the pharmacy. "My mom's prescription." "And you need $5? "Yes, sir." "Only 5? "Yes, sir." The man frowned slightly. Most people asking for help asked for much more. His gaze drifted toward the pharmacy window, then back to Tyson. "Show me." Without hesitation, Tyson unzipped his jacket and carefully removed the brown envelope. He held it with both hands as though it were something fragile. The older man noticed the faded pencil writing before Tyson even spoke. Mom's medicine. Tyson opened the flap carefully. Instead of holding it out like someone asking for charity, he turned the envelope upside down. Bills and coins slid gently into his own palm. "I already have the rest." The stranger looked down. There were stacks of quarters wrapped with rubber bands, small piles of nickels, dollar bills folded so neatly they almost looked ironed. Not one coin appeared randomly thrown together. Every cent had been organized. Every dollar had clearly been protected. "I counted it 3 times, Tyson said quietly. "It's $42.82. He smiled awkwardly. "I keep hoping maybe I counted wrong." For the first time, something shifted inside the older man's expression. Not pity, recognition. He crouched until he was almost eye level with Tyson. "Did someone give you all this?" Tyson immediately shook his head. No, sir. Where did it come from? I earned it. All of it. Yes. The man glanced once toward his driver, then back again. How? Tyson hesitated. Not because he wanted to hide anything, because he wasn't sure anyone would care about the answer. I collected cans after football games. He pointed toward his worn gloves hanging from his backpack. I cleaned yards. I pushed grocery carts. I helped unload vegetables at the weekend market. I walked dogs. I recycled bottles. I didn't want Mom to know. The man's eyebrows lifted slightly. Why not? She would have told me to stop. Why? Because she'd rather stay sick than let me miss school. The answer came so naturally that Tyson didn't realize how deeply it landed. The older man looked again at the coins, then at Tyson's hands. They were the hands of an 11-year-old, but tiny cuts crossed several knuckles. One fingernail was broken. His palms were rough in places children rarely noticed, hands that had worked, not played. The driver quietly stepped closer. Mr. Whitmore. The older man raised one finger without looking away from Tyson. The driver immediately fell silent. Tyson didn't recognize the name. Harrison Whitmore. It meant nothing to him. He saw only a stranger listening more carefully than anyone else had all week. Harrison reached toward the brown envelope. May I? Tyson nodded. He handed it over. The envelope felt unexpectedly warm. Its corners had been reinforced with transparent tape. Along one edge, tiny pencil marks showed previous totals. $31, $36, $39, $42. Someone had recorded every milestone, as if every dollar deserved to be remembered. Harrison gently ran his thumb across the faded words. Mom's medicine. His breathing slowed. For a brief moment, the busy parking lot disappeared. The pharmacy lights faded. The traffic vanished. Instead, another memory returned. A much older one. A different brown envelope. A different evening. Another child. His younger brother. The memory arrived without warning. So vivid that Harrison almost heard his mother's voice again. He blinked hard, forcing himself back to the present. Tyson was still waiting. Not impatiently, not expectantly, simply waiting. If I can't, Tyson began quietly. It's okay. Harrison looked up. What do you mean? I mean, thank you for listening. He started gathering his money back into the envelope. One quarter rolled across the pavement. Before Tyson could reach it, Harrison picked it up. Instead of handing it over immediately, he looked closely at the worn coin. It wasn't worth anything special. Just 25 cents. Yet Tyson bent down almost anxiously. I don't want to lose any. Harrison handed it back. You know, he said softly, most people would have asked me to buy the whole prescription. Tyson carefully returned the quarter to the envelope. I didn't earn that. The answer caught Harrison completely off guard. You only asked for $5. Because that's the part I couldn't finish. Harrison stared at him. Tyson continued almost apologetically. My mom always says we should finish what we start. He smiled faintly. I think I already finished most of it. The sentence landed with astonishing force. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true. This child hadn't come looking for rescue. He had already carried nearly the entire burden himself. He wasn't asking someone else to climb the mountain. He was asking for a hand over the final step. Harrison slowly stood. For several long seconds, he didn't speak. He looked toward the pharmacy, then toward Tyson, then back at the worn brown envelope. Behind the pharmacy window, Emily Parker had witnessed nearly the entire conversation. She couldn't hear the words through the glass, but she could read body language. She watched the distinguished man holding Tyson's envelope with extraordinary care, as though it were more valuable than the expensive watch on his wrist. She whispered to herself, "Please don't walk away. Outside, Harrison finally broke the silence. "Come with me." Tyson looked confused. "Where?" Harrison turned toward the pharmacy entrance. "We're going inside." Tyson hesitated. "I still only have $42.82. Harrison looked at him with a calm expression Tyson would never forget. "I know." Then, without another word, Harrison Whitmore held open the pharmacy door and waited for Tyson to walk in first. The bell above the pharmacy door rang softly as Harrison Whitmore and Tyson stepped inside. Emily Parker looked up from the prescription counter. Relief flashed across her face when she saw the boy return, but her expression quickly changed to surprise when she recognized the man beside him. She had seen Harrison Whitmore only in business magazines and healthcare conferences streamed online. His company supplied medications to hospitals across the country, though few people knew what he looked like in person. She straightened instinctively. "Good evening." Harrison returned the greeting with a polite nod. "Good evening." He placed the brown envelope gently on the counter instead of handing over a credit card. "This belongs to him." Emily glanced at Tyson, then at the envelope, then back at Harrison. "Yes, sir." Harrison didn't speak immediately. His eyes rested on the faded pencil writing one more time. Mom's medicine. 3 simple words. 3 words that had reached across nearly 5 decades and reopened a door he had spent years keeping closed. People often assumed Harrison Whitmore had been born into privilege. The truth was almost the opposite. Long before private jets, board meetings, and television interviews, there had been a 2-bedroom apartment in Youngstown. The wallpaper peeled away from the walls. Winter drafts slipped beneath the front door. His father repaired factory machines 6 days a week. His mother cleaned motel rooms whenever extra shifts became available. Money disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Harrison had been 12. His younger brother Daniel was only 8. Daniel laughed easily. He collected baseball cards, built tiny airplanes from scrap wood, and believed every stray dog deserved a name. Then pneumonia arrived. At first, everyone believed it was just another cold. Within days, Daniel could barely breathe. Their family doctor prescribed medicine. Harrison still remembered watching his father unfold the prescription while silently counting the money inside his wallet. There wasn't enough. Only a few dollars short. Just a few. His parents promised they would return the following morning after borrowing money from relatives. The pharmacist apologized. Without full payment, the medicine couldn't leave the shelf. Nobody argued, nobody shouted. Rules were rules. During the night, Daniel's fever climbed higher. By sunrise, an ambulance rushed him to the hospital. 3 days later, Harrison stood beside a hospital bed that had become far too quiet. No one ever proved those missing dollars caused his brother's death. Medicine isn't magic. Doctors never promised certainty. But an 11-year-old boy had spent the rest of his childhood wondering whether almost enough could have become enough. That question never completely disappeared. Years later, Harrison earned scholarships, worked endless hours, built one business after another. He entered the healthcare industry with one promise whispered only to himself. No family should ever feel powerless because of money. His companies grew. 1 warehouse became 5, 5 became 50. Employees numbered in the thousands. Shareholders celebrated. Stock prices climbed. Quarterly reports improved. Somewhere along the journey, meetings replaced memories. Growth charts replaced faces. Spreadsheets replaced stories. He continued believing he was helping people. Yet it had been years since he had stood inside an ordinary neighborhood pharmacy at closing time. Years since he had watched someone count coins one by one. Years since he had looked into the eyes of someone missing only a few dollars. Tyson had unknowingly taken him back to the place where everything began. Emily's voice gently interrupted the silence. "Sir," Harrison blinked. "I'm sorry." He smiled faintly. "I was remembering someone." Tyson stood quietly beside him, uncertain whether he should speak. He noticed Harrison wasn't looking at expensive displays or checking his phone. Instead, he kept staring at the envelope, as though it meant something neither of them had explained. Harrison looked down at Tyson. "Do you know why I asked whether you earned this money yourself?" Tyson shook his head. "No, sir." "Because I needed to understand something." "What?" "I needed to know whether this envelope represented hope or surrender." Tyson frowned slightly. "I don't understand." Harrison smiled. "I didn't either when I was your age." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Harrison continued. "My little brother once became very sick." Tyson listened carefully. "We were poor." "So were we," Tyson answered quietly. "I know." The words came before Harrison even realized he had spoken them. Tyson looked surprised. "You do?" "I used to." Harrison leaned lightly against the counter. "My family couldn't always afford what we needed." "What happened?" Harrison's gaze drifted toward the pharmacy shelves lined with neatly organized bottles. "My brother never came home." Emily lowered her eyes. Even without details, the pain inside those 6 words filled the room. Tyson didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry." "So am I." Harrison smiled sadly. "I've spent many years trying to make healthcare easier for people." "You work in medicine?" "In a way." "What do you do?" "I help make decisions." Tyson accepted the answer without further questions. Adults often described jobs strangely. He didn't realize the man speaking owned the company whose name appeared on dozens of medication boxes throughout the pharmacy. Harrison reached toward the envelope again. "Do you know what impresses me most?" "The money? No." "The work?" "Partly." He tapped the front of the envelope gently. "You gave this a name." Tyson nodded. "I didn't want to forget what it was for." "So every dollar already had a purpose?" "Yes." "You never spent any of it?" "No, not even when you wanted something." Tyson smiled shyly. "I wanted new basketball shoes." "What happened?" "I decided Mom could use medicine more." Harrison looked away for a second. His throat tightened unexpectedly. Some board meetings discussed million-dollar investments with less seriousness than this child discussed worn sneakers. The driver quietly entered the pharmacy. "Mr. Whitmore, your 6 o'clock call?" "Cancel it." The driver hesitated. "It concerns tomorrow's acquisition." "It can wait." "Yes, sir." The driver stepped back without another word. Tyson noticed the exchange. "Are you important?" Harrison laughed softly. "My assistant thinks so." Tyson grinned. "I think my mom is more important." Emily couldn't help smiling. "So do I," Harrison replied. Silence settled again. Comfortable this time. Outside darkness had fully arrived. The pharmacy lights reflected against the front windows. Customers gradually disappeared until only the 3 of them remained near the prescription counter. Emily quietly retrieved Grace's medication from the shelf. She placed it beside the register, but said nothing. She sensed something meaningful was unfolding that had little to do with business. Harrison looked at Tyson one final time. "You've already climbed almost the entire mountain." Tyson glanced toward the prescription bag. "I tried." "I know." "No one else had to." "I know. I just—" He struggled to find the right words. "I couldn't finish." Harrison nodded slowly. His answer came almost as a whisper. "Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who never need help." Tyson looked up. "They're the ones who do everything they can before asking for it." Those words echoed through Harrison himself as much as they did through the quiet pharmacy. For the first time in many years, he realized he hadn't forgotten the promise he made beside his brother's hospital bed. He had simply wandered too far away from it. Tonight, an 11-year-old carrying a taped brown envelope had quietly shown him the path back. Emily Parker, quietly entered the final amount into the register. The display glowed beneath the fluorescent lights. $47.82. Tyson looked at the number for what felt like the 100th time. He knew every digit by heart. $47.82. He reached for the brown envelope. "I'll count it again." Emily smiled gently. "You already counted it perfectly." "I know." Tyson carefully poured the money onto the counter once more anyway. He stacked the dollar bills, lined up the quarters, grouped the dimes. He wanted Harrison Whitmore to see exactly what he had brought. Nothing hidden, nothing exaggerated. When the last penny rested on the counter, Tyson folded his hands behind his back. "That's everything." Harrison studied the neat little piles, not because he doubted the amount, because the careful arrangement told him something about the boy standing beside him. Every coin had been respected. Every dollar had been earned. He looked at Tyson. "You've never asked anyone else for the missing $5. Tyson thought for a moment. "I almost did." "When?" "Outside." "What happened?" "I couldn't." "Why not?" "Because they didn't know me." Harrison tilted his head slightly. "And I do." "No." Tyson smiled awkwardly. "But you stopped long enough to listen." The answer lingered between them. Listening. It sounded so simple. Yet Harrison realized how rare it had become in his own life. Meetings were scheduled by the minute. Conversations often ended before people finished speaking. Somewhere along the way, he had become excellent at answering questions. He had forgotten how to truly hear them. He rested one hand lightly on the counter. "Tell me something." "Okay. If I gave you $50 instead of $5, Tyson immediately interrupted. "I couldn't take it." Harrison wasn't expecting such a quick answer. "Why not?" "I didn't earn it." "What if I wanted to give it to you?" Tyson looked genuinely conflicted. "I'd still say no." Emily stopped pretending to organize prescription bottles. Even she wanted to hear where the conversation was going. Harrison folded his arms. "What if I paid for your groceries, too?" Tyson shook his head. "What if I bought you new clothes?" Another shake. "What about new shoes?" Tyson glanced down at the worn sneakers whose soles had begun separating near the toes. For a brief second, desire crossed his face. Then it disappeared. "My shoes still work." Harrison smiled faintly. "Barely." "They still work." "And if I offered to help your mother with rent?" Tyson hesitated much longer this time. Finally, he answered carefully. "Mom would tell me to thank you. And then she'd probably say no." "Why? She says accepting kindness is different from depending on it." Harrison slowly nodded. That sounded exactly like the kind of woman who would raise a child, willing to work for weeks before asking a stranger for $5. He looked toward Emily. "Miss Parker." "Yes, sir." "Would you please tell me something?" "Of course." "When did this prescription arrive?" 3 days ago. "And he's been coming back?" Emily nodded. "He first asked how much it cost. Then he returned yesterday to check whether the price had changed." "It hadn't." "No." "And today, he brought everything he had." Emily's voice softened. "He never once asked anyone to lower the price. He never argued. He only asked whether there was another way." Harrison turned back to Tyson. "Was there?" Tyson shrugged. "I hoped, maybe." Emily quietly added, "He also refused extra money he hadn't earned." Tyson looked embarrassed. "You didn't have to tell him that." "I think I did." Harrison looked surprised. "What happened?" Emily smiled. "Mrs. Alvarez came in earlier today." Tyson blinked. "She told you—" "She picked up blood pressure medication." Emily laughed softly. She couldn't stop talking about the little boy who refused $5 extra because he hadn't worked for them. Tyson rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't want anyone discussing me. I'm sorry. It's okay. Harrison's smile grew warmer. So you've been making quite an impression around the neighborhood. I didn't mean to. I know. Silence settled again. The pharmacy clock now read 5:58. Only 2 minutes remained before closing. Emily looked nervously toward the pharmacist, finishing paperwork at the other end of the counter. Technically, she couldn't keep the register open much longer. Harrison reached into his inside coat pocket. Tyson watched without speaking. Instead of pulling out cash immediately, Harrison removed a worn leather wallet. Inside, among business cards and credit cards, rested a faded photograph. He looked at it for only a second. A smiling little boy wearing a baseball cap. Daniel, his younger brother. Harrison quietly slipped the photograph back into place. Then he removed a $5 bill. It wasn't crisp. It had been folded several times. He smoothed it carefully against the counter. This, he said quietly, placing the bill beside Tyson's money, isn't charity. Tyson looked up. It isn't. No. What is it? Harrison thought carefully before answering. It's the final piece. Tyson stared at the bill. I don't understand. You already carried almost all the weight. Harrison gently nudged the bill toward the envelope. You climbed almost the entire mountain. He paused. I'm only steadying your hand for the last step. Tyson didn't touch the money. He looked uncertain. I don't want to owe you. Harrison smiled. You won't. I won't. No. Why? Because someday you'll do the same thing for someone else. Tyson frowned thoughtfully. What if I never have money? You will have something. Like what? Time. Kindness. Experience. Encouragement. Harrison's voice remained calm. We don't always repay the person who helped us. Sometimes we repay the world. Tyson looked at the $5 bill again. His mother's words echoed inside him. Finish what you start. For the first time since beginning his journey, accepting help didn't feel like abandoning that lesson. It felt like completing it. Very slowly he reached for the bill. Not greedily, almost reverently. He placed it inside the brown envelope beside the money he had earned himself. Then he folded the flap closed. The envelope finally felt complete. He handed it to Emily. Now it's enough. Emily's eyes shimmered. Yes, it is. She carefully counted everything once more. $47.82, exactly. No discount, no special treatment, no unpaid balance. Only one envelope carrying money honestly earned and honestly completed. She printed the receipt, placed Grace's medicine inside a white pharmacy bag, then slid both the bag and the receipt across the counter. Tyson accepted them with both hands. For several seconds, he simply held the bag against his chest. Not smiling, not crying, just breathing, as though the weight inside was far greater than a bottle of medicine. He turned toward Harrison. Thank you. Harrison shook his head gently. No. Tyson looked confused. You already thanked me. I did. When you refused to quit. Tyson didn't fully understand. But years later, Harrison Whitmore would remember that moment more clearly than many of the billion-dollar contracts he signed throughout his career. Because for the first time in decades, he no longer felt like a wealthy man helping a poor child. He felt like an older brother finally keeping a promise he had made long ago. Tyson stepped out of the pharmacy with the white paper bag pressed tightly against his chest. The cool evening air no longer felt as sharp. For the first time in days, he wasn't thinking about numbers. Not $47.82. Not $5. Not the coins inside the envelope. He was thinking about getting home, before his mother worried. "Thank you again," he said quietly to Harrison. "I'm going to take this to my mom." Harrison glanced toward the medicine bag. "May I ask you one more question?" "Sure." "Has your mother seen a doctor since receiving this prescription?" Tyson nodded. "Dr. Foster at the community clinic." "And has she gone back?" "No." "Why not?" "They wanted to see her again this week." He hesitated. "The visit costs money." Harrison's expression grew serious. "When was she supposed to return?" "Yesterday." Emily, who had stepped outside to lock one of the pharmacy doors, quietly added, "The prescription should help, but Dr. Foster wrote on the paperwork that she needed a follow-up examination." Tyson looked down. "I know." "Why didn't she go?" "She said she'd feel better after the medicine." Emily exchanged a quick glance with Harrison. Neither liked that answer. Harrison crouched once more, so he and Tyson were eye level. "Would you let me drive you home?" Tyson instinctively took half a step backward. "I don't want to bother you." "You wouldn't." "My apartment isn't very nice." "I'm not coming to inspect your apartment." Tyson couldn't help smiling. "I just want to make sure your mother begins taking this medication tonight." The boy considered it carefully. Grace had always warned him never to get into a stranger's car. But Harrison no longer felt like a stranger. He had listened. He had waited. Most importantly, he had respected Tyson's effort instead of replacing it. Still, Tyson answered honestly. "I should ask my mom first." Harrison nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." He reached into his pocket and handed Tyson a simple business card. There was no company logo across the front, only his name and a phone number. "If your mother says no, I'll respect that." Tyson accepted the card carefully. At that moment, Harrison's phone vibrated. His assistant's name appeared on the screen. He silenced the call without answering. The driver approached quietly. "Sir, the board meeting has already started." "It can continue without me." "They're waiting for your decision." "They've waited before." The driver nodded respectfully and stepped away. Tyson looked puzzled. "Are they going to be mad?" Harrison smiled. "They'll survive." Tyson laughed softly. "I've never made adults wait." "You'd be surprised how often adults make children wait." The simple observation lingered in Harrison's mind. Children waited. At clinics, at food banks, at school offices, outside pharmacies. Waiting had become a normal part of poverty. That realization made him unexpectedly uncomfortable. Instead of opening the SUV door, Harrison looked toward Emily. "Is the community clinic still open?" She checked the clock. "Dr. Foster usually stays until 7 finishing paperwork." Harrison turned to Tyson. "Would your mother be willing to see him tonight if transportation weren't a problem?" Tyson's eyes widened. "I think so." "But she'd say it costs too much." "What if the clinic agrees to see her first?" "I don't know." Harrison looked toward the driver. "Please call the community clinic." "Yes, sir." "Ask whether Dr. Benjamin Foster is still there." The driver walked several steps away to make the call. Tyson watched curiously. "You know my doctor?" "I don't." "I hope to." A few minutes later, the driver returned. "He's still in the building." "Good." "The receptionist says they're closing." Harrison nodded. "Tell them I'm bringing someone who missed a follow-up because she couldn't afford to come." The driver hesitated. They asked for the patient's name. Harrison looked at Tyson. "May I tell them?" Tyson nodded. "Grace Cox." The driver repeated the information into the phone. Several moments passed. Then his expression changed. "They'll wait." Tyson looked astonished. "They will." "They said Dr. Foster asked them to." The boy stared at the medicine bag. Everything had happened so quickly that he could barely keep up. I don't understand. Harrison rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Sometimes doctors worry about their patients even after office hours. They do. The good ones do. Tyson smiled. Dr. Foster is nice. I'm looking forward to meeting him. The SUV pulled away from the pharmacy a few minutes later. Tyson sat in the back seat beside the medicine, carefully holding the paper bag upright with both hands, as though it contained glass. Harrison sat beside him rather than in the front. Neither spoke for the first few minutes. The city lights drifted across the windows. People hurried along sidewalks carrying groceries and backpacks. Restaurants filled with evening customers. Life continued normally. Yet inside the quiet vehicle, two people from entirely different worlds shared an unexpected silence. Finally, Harrison spoke. What does your mother like to do when she's healthy? Tyson smiled immediately. She loves gardening. Gardening? We don't have a garden. So she grows flowers in coffee cans. Harrison laughed. Really? She says flowers don't care what they're planted in. What kinds? Marigolds. Sunflowers. And herbs. The apartment smells like mint sometimes. Harrison listened closely. The answers weren't about illness. They were about life. He liked that. What about you? I like basketball. Do you play? Mostly at school? Favorite team? The Cavaliers. Harrison grinned. I should have guessed. Tyson relaxed a little more. By the time the SUV reached the apartment building, the conversation felt surprisingly natural. The vehicle stopped beside the curb. Tyson immediately unbuckled his seatbelt. I'll be right back. Before Harrison could answer, the boy hurried upstairs carrying the medicine. Several minutes passed. The hallway light inside apartment 3B flickered on, then off. Finally, Tyson returned, this time supporting his mother carefully down the stairs. Grace moved slowly. Her face looked pale, and each step required visible effort. When she reached the sidewalk, she stopped. Tyson had already explained everything. She looked directly at Harrison. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to. You helped my son. He helped himself. Grace smiled faintly. That sounds like something my father used to say. She glanced at Tyson. Did you really work for all that money? Tyson lowered his eyes. Yes. You didn't tell me. I wanted to surprise you. Instead of becoming angry, Grace gently placed one hand against her son's cheek. You should never have carried this alone. I know. I'm sorry. She pulled him into a careful embrace despite her weakness. You have nothing to apologize for. Her voice trembled. You honored everything I've tried to teach you. Tyson hugged her tighter. I just wanted you to get better. Grace kissed the top of his head. I know. For several quiet seconds, neither moved. Harrison watched without interrupting. Some moments deserved witnesses more than words. When Grace finally looked up again, Harrison spoke gently. Dr. Foster is still at the clinic. She looked surprised. At this hour? He's waiting. I can't afford another visit. We'll discuss money later. Grace immediately shook her head. No. Harrison wasn't offended. Instead, he smiled. I thought you might say that. He reached into his coat pocket and held out the folded follow-up appointment slip Emily had quietly placed in his hand before they left the pharmacy. I'm not asking you to accept charity. I'm asking you to keep an appointment your doctor believes is important. Grace looked at the paper for a long moment. Then she looked at Tyson. Finally, she nodded. For my son. Harrison opened the SUV door. Then let's make sure you have many more years to remind him to finish what he starts. The community clinic occupied the first floor of an aging medical building only 10 minutes from Grace's apartment. By the time Harrison's SUV pulled into the parking lot, most of the lights inside had already been turned off. Only the reception desk and one examination room remained illuminated. Tyson hurried around the vehicle to help his mother. "I've got you." Grace smiled tiredly. "I know you do." Inside the waiting room was nearly empty. A television mounted in one corner played muted evening news, while a receptionist finished organizing patient files for the next morning. She immediately recognized Grace. "I'm glad you came back." Grace offered an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry I missed yesterday." The receptionist simply nodded. "Dr. Foster said he'd wait." A few moments later, Dr. Benjamin Foster stepped into the hallway. He was in his early 50s, his white coat slightly wrinkled, after a long day, reading glasses resting on top of his head. When he saw Grace, relief crossed his face. "I've been worried about you." "I'm sorry." "You don't need to apologize." His attention shifted toward Tyson. "And you must be the young man who's been trying to take care of everyone." Tyson looked embarrassed. "I tried." "I've heard." Dr. Foster smiled warmly. Then he noticed Harrison standing quietly near the doorway. "I'm Benjamin Foster." "Harrison Whitmore." The doctor extended his hand without recognizing the name. "It's good to meet you." "You too." No introductions about wealth. No mention of companies. Only two men meeting because they cared about the same patient. Dr. Foster led Grace into an examination room. Tyson started to follow. "Can I come?" Grace nodded. "Always?" Harrison remained outside. He didn't belong in the private medical examination. Instead, he sat quietly in the waiting room. The driver approached. "The board has postponed the meeting until tomorrow morning." Harrison barely looked up. "Good. They're asking whether you'd like briefing documents sent here?" "No." The driver hesitated. "You've never postponed a quarterly review before." Harrison looked toward the examination room door. "Some things matter more than quarterly reports." The driver quietly nodded. Inside the examination room, Dr. Foster listened carefully to Grace's lungs. He checked her oxygen level, measured her blood pressure, repeated several simple breathing tests. His expression gradually became more serious. Grace noticed immediately. "What is it?" "The medication should help." But the infection is more advanced than I hoped." Tyson's fingers tightened around the chair beside him. "Is she going to be okay?" Dr. Foster looked directly at the boy before answering. "I believe so." The pause afterward made Grace nervous. "But she needs proper follow-up." He turned toward Grace. "You've been cutting your heart medication again, haven't you?" Grace lowered her eyes. "A little." "I can tell. I wanted it to last longer." Dr. Foster sighed quietly. "Grace, stretching medication almost always creates bigger problems later." "I know. I wasn't trying to be careless." "I know. I just—" Her voice weakened. "There were bills." Dr. Foster nodded gently. "I understand." "No." Grace shook her head. "I don't think anyone really does." For a moment, the room became completely still. Then Tyson spoke. "I do?" Both adults looked toward him. "I counted all the bills with Mom. I know how much rent is. I know why she cuts pills." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She had worked so hard to protect him. Without realizing it, he had been protecting her instead. Dr. Foster sat down across from them. "I'm going to adjust your treatment plan." Grace looked anxious. "I can't afford more medicine." "We'll figure that part out." "I don't want favors." "This isn't a favor." He smiled reassuringly. "It's my job." Outside, Harrison quietly walked toward the reception desk. The receptionist recognized him from earlier introductions. "Can I help you?" "I hope so." He lowered his voice. "How often does this happen?" She looked confused. "What do you mean? Patients missing follow-up appointments because they can't afford transportation, or medication, or another visit?" The receptionist hesitated. "More often than we'd like." "How often?" she thought carefully. "Several times every week." Harrison frowned. "And prescriptions?" she sighed. "Sometimes patients never pick them up. Even when the balance is small, especially then." He looked surprised. "Why especially?" "Because people who've already spent almost everything they have usually don't have another $5 or $10. The words landed heavily. $5. Again. Harrison leaned lightly against the counter. "Does anyone keep records?" "Records of prescriptions left unclaimed." The receptionist nodded. "The pharmacies report some data." "What happens to it?" She gave a helpless shrug. "It gets filed." "No one studies it." "I don't think so." Harrison fell silent. He had spent decades reading reports about market share manufacturing efficiency, distribution costs, and insurance reimbursements. But he had never once seen a report measuring how many people stopped just a few dollars short. Not because the information didn't exist, because no one had asked the question. Emily Parker's words returned to him. "I wanted a fund for families who were just a few dollars short. Rules have to be the same for everyone." He suddenly wondered how many thousands of brown envelopes had never been completed. The examination room door opened. Grace walked out more slowly than before, but with a calmer expression. Tyson carried a folder of instructions. Dr. Foster followed behind them. "I'd like to see you again in 3 days." Grace nodded. "I'll come. I'll hold you to that." He smiled at Tyson. "And I'm assigning you one important job." Tyson stood straighter. "Yes, sir. I need you to remind your mother to rest." Grace laughed softly. "Good luck with that." Tyson grinned. "I can do it." As they walked toward the exit, Harrison stopped beside Dr. Foster. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "How many patients do you think delay treatment because they come up just a few dollars short?" The doctor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the nearly empty waiting room, then back at Harrison. "I've practiced medicine for 24 years. "Yes?" "I've learned that illness is rarely the only thing making people sick." Harrison listened carefully. "Sometimes it's loneliness. Sometimes transportation. Sometimes fear. And sometimes," he paused, "it's exactly $5. The sentence echoed through Harrison with almost physical force. He looked toward Tyson walking beside his mother, carefully matching her slow pace. The boy hadn't changed the world tonight. He hadn't solved poverty. He hadn't cured disease. But he had exposed a question Harrison could no longer ignore. How many lives were quietly waiting on the other side of a few missing dollars? As the SUV pulled away from the clinic under the glow of the streetlights, Harrison looked once more at the worn brown envelope resting safely in Tyson's lap. For everyone else, it was simply paper. For Harrison Whitmore, it had become evidence. Evidence that the biggest failures in healthcare were not always measured in millions. Sometimes they were measured in $5. Harrison Whitmore barely slept that night. His penthouse overlooked downtown Cleveland, where thousands of lights shimmered across the lake, but the view that usually calmed him no longer held his attention. Instead, one image kept returning. A worn brown envelope. Mom's medicine. 5 missing dollars. At 5:45 the next morning, he was already seated in his home office. Stacks of briefing documents covered the conference table. Quarterly forecasts, expansion proposals, acquisition reports. Normally, he would have reviewed every page before sunrise. Instead, he picked up his phone. "Good morning, Linda." His executive assistant answered immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. I need every report our foundation has regarding unclaimed prescriptions." A brief silence followed. "I'm sorry. You heard me. We don't normally collect that information, I know." "Should I ask the research division?" "Yes. And contact our pharmacy partners." Linda typed rapidly. "What exactly are we looking for?" Harrison looked out the window. "I want to know how many prescriptions are never picked up. And why? Especially when the unpaid balance is under $20. "Under 20, he answered quietly. "Start with 10. Linda hesitated. "May I ask why?" Harrison thought about Tyson arranging coins into perfect little piles. "Because I met someone yesterday." By 8 o'clock, the executive board gathered on the 42nd floor of Whitmore Health Headquarters. The room overlooked the city skyline. Large monitors displayed sales figures and market projections. Vice presidents discussed manufacturing costs. Regional directors compared growth percentages. Everything looked exactly as it had at hundreds of previous meetings. Only Harrison seemed different. Halfway through the financial presentation, he raised one hand. "We're changing today's agenda." The room fell silent. The chief financial officer looked surprised. "Sir, I have a question." No one spoke. Harrison continued. "How many prescriptions filled by our products are never actually picked up by patients?" Several executives exchanged confused glances. Finally, the head of operations answered. "We don't track that." "Why not?" "Because pharmacies handle dispensing, and manufacturers handle production. We've never had access to that information." Harrison nodded slowly. "Then we're going to get access." The chief financial officer adjusted his glasses. "May I ask what prompted this?" Harrison stood and walked toward the windows. "Yesterday I met an 11-year-old boy." No one interrupted. "He worked for weeks. He collected cans, returned shopping carts, cleaned yards." He turned back toward the room. "He earned $42.82. Several executives looked puzzled. "What happened?" someone finally asked. "He needed $47.82. Silence settled across the boardroom. "So he was short $5. The numbers sounded almost insignificant, spoken aloud. $5. Less than the price of coffee in the building cafeteria. Harrison looked around the room. "Tell me, how much did this company earn yesterday?" The chief financial officer glanced toward his laptop. "Approximately $4.6 million in net operating profit." Harrison nodded. "And how much separated that child from his mother's medicine?" Nobody answered, because everyone already knew. $5. The contrast made the room feel strangely uncomfortable. The vice president of compliance spoke carefully. "With respect, sir." "Yes?" "We can't simply pay everyone's prescriptions." "I didn't say we could." "There are regulations." "I know." "There are abuse concerns." "I know." "There are legal liabilities." "I know." Harrison's voice remained calm. "But there must be a smarter answer than pretending the problem doesn't exist." Linda quietly entered, carrying a thin folder. "The preliminary research you requested." He accepted it immediately. Already inside were several early estimates gathered overnight. Independent studies, hospital reports, charitable pharmacy data. One statistic caught his attention. Thousands of prescriptions every year went unclaimed because patients couldn't pay the remaining balance. Many balances were under $10. He closed the folder slowly. The room remained silent. "What would it cost?" Harrison asked, "to create a pilot program covering unpaid prescription balances under $10? The chief financial officer began calculating. "It depends on participation." Estimate. Perhaps, he paused. Less than 0.1% of last year's charitable budget. Harrison looked around the table. 0.1%. No one argued, because the number sounded surprisingly small. Another executive spoke. But if people learn about it, they might take advantage. Harrison nodded. Some will, but many won't. He looked again at the folder. The existence of abuse doesn't erase genuine need. The room fell quiet once more. Meanwhile, across town, Grace sat at the tiny kitchen table with her first morning dose of medication. Tyson poured a glass of water. You have to eat first? Grace smiled. Now you're giving orders? I'm following Dr. Foster's. She laughed softly. Fair enough. The medicine went down slowly. For the first time in weeks, hope tasted stronger than fear. Tyson carefully unfolded the pharmacy receipt. He had placed it inside the brown envelope after returning home. Everything stayed together. The receipt, the $5 bill's place in the story, the handwritten words, Mom's medicine. Grace noticed him looking at it. You've kept the envelope. I'm not throwing it away. Why? Tyson thought for a moment. So I remember. Remember what? That sometimes finishing something takes longer than you expect. Grace reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you. Later that afternoon, Harrison visited the neighborhood pharmacy again. Emily Parker looked genuinely surprised. I didn't expect to see you. I had another question. She smiled. I figured. He rested his hands on the counter. If someone wanted to identify prescriptions abandoned because patients were just a few dollars short. Emily answered before he finished. I could probably tell you dozens. So it's common. Much more than people think. What happens? Eventually they're returned to stock. And the patients, she sighed. Sometimes they come back. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they end up in emergency rooms. Harrison stood quietly. Emily looked at him curiously. You've been thinking about that little boy. I have. He changed something, didn't he? Harrison smiled faintly. I think he reminded me of something. What? Why I entered healthcare in the first place. Emily nodded slowly. Then she disappeared into a back office. When she returned, she carried a small cardboard box. She placed it on the counter. What's this? These are copies. Copies of what? She opened the lid. Inside were dozens of anonymous records. Prescription numbers, dates, amounts still owed. $8, $3.40, $9.15, $6, $4.83. No names. Only unpaid balances. Emily looked at Harrison. I started keeping this after management said no to my idea. You kept them. I wanted proof. She smiled sadly. I just never found someone willing to look. Harrison slowly picked up the first page, then the second, then another. Every sheet represented someone who had almost made it, someone who had stopped only a few dollars away. He looked back at Emily. I think it's time someone finally did. As he carried the small cardboard box toward the exit, Harrison realized that Tyson hadn't simply helped one mother receive medicine. Without intending to, an 11-year-old boy had handed a billionaire the evidence needed to change far more than one prescription. 3 weeks passed. Autumn settled gently over Cleveland. The maple trees lining Grace's apartment complex slowly exchanged their green leaves for shades of gold and crimson. Inside apartment 3B, life no longer revolved around counting pills. The medication had begun doing its job. Grace still tired easily, but the constant pressure in her chest had eased. Her breathing grew steadier. She could climb the apartment stairs without stopping twice. Most importantly, she had started smiling again. Every morning, Tyson watched carefully as she swallowed her medicine after breakfast. Only after seeing the empty glass would he shoulder his backpack for school. "You don't have to watch me every day," Grace teased one morning. "I know." "Then why do you—" Tyson grinned. "Dr. Foster gave me a job." Grace laughed. "He certainly did." At the clinic, Dr. Foster compared Grace's latest test results with the previous month's. He looked up with obvious satisfaction. "You're improving." Grace released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Really? Your heart rhythm is more stable. The inflammation is coming down. And your oxygen levels are much better." Tyson practically bounced in his chair. "I told you the medicine was working." Dr. Foster smiled. "So did science." Grace shook her head with a laugh. "I think he trusts himself more than science." "I trust both." The doctor closed the medical file. "Keep taking the medication exactly as prescribed." "I will. No more cutting pills." Grace raised both hands in surrender. "I promise." As they prepared to leave, Dr. Foster handed Grace a folded sheet of paper. "I'd also like you to meet someone." Grace looked puzzled. "Who?" "A community employment coordinator." "I haven't been healthy enough to work." "I know. But you're getting there." The thought surprised her. For months, she had focused only on surviving. She hadn't allowed herself to imagine life beyond illness. Across town, Harrison Whitmore sat inside another executive meeting. This one looked very different from the previous month. Instead of discussing sales forecasts, several large screens displayed charts gathered from pharmacy partners across Ohio. Thousands of prescriptions, unclaimed balances, average unpaid amounts, geographic patterns. Linda stood beside the presentation. "We've reviewed data from more than 200 participating pharmacies." Harrison listened silently. "What did we learn?" She changed the slide. "The average unpaid balance among abandoned prescriptions is $7.38. No one in the room spoke. Another slide appeared. Nearly 60% of abandoned prescriptions are left behind when patients owe less than $10. Another. Many involve heart medication, antibiotics, insulin, and blood pressure treatment. Harrison slowly closed the folder in front of him. "So the problem is real." The research director nodded. "Much larger than we expected." The chief financial officer looked thoughtful. "The estimated annual cost of covering those balances?" He tapped several figures into a calculator. "Is surprisingly manageable." Harrison glanced around the room. "Any objections?" The legal department spoke first. "If eligibility is verified through participating pharmacies, we can structure it responsibly." Operations agreed. Finance agreed. Compliance agreed. One by one, the objections that had once seemed overwhelming found practical solutions. Finally, Harrison stood. "I'd like to propose something." The room waited. "We'll begin a statewide pilot program." Linda smiled slightly. "The name," Harrison looked toward the city skyline beyond the glass. He remembered Tyson carefully placing the $5 bill into the envelope. He remembered the sentence that had changed everything. "I just couldn't finish." He turned back toward the board. "We'll call it $5 forward." The word settled quietly across the room. He continued. "No patient whose verified prescription balance is $10 or less should leave without medication because of that final amount." The chief financial officer nodded. "It's memorable." The head of communications smiled. "It also explains itself." Harrison added one final condition. "No advertisements. No press conference. No photographs of patients. If we do this, we do it because people need medicine. Not because we need publicity." Everyone agreed. Later that afternoon, Emily Parker was restocking medications when her pharmacy manager called everyone together. "I've just received notice from corporate." The staff gathered around. Emily listened absent-mindedly until she heard 3 words. $5 forward. Her eyes widened. The manager continued reading. Beginning next Monday, verified patients who are unable to complete payment by $10 or less may qualify for assistance through a new partnership. Emily could barely believe it. She raised her hand. Is this real? The manager laughed. I checked twice. Emily smiled so broadly that another technician noticed. You look happier than anyone, Emily quietly answered. I've been waiting years to hear something like this. That evening, Harrison stopped by Grace's apartment without announcing himself. Not to bring gifts, only to check on her. Tyson opened the door. Mr. Whitmore. Good evening. Grace stood from the small sofa. You didn't have to come. I know. You've already done more than enough. I'm not sure that's possible. He looked around the apartment. The windows were open. Fresh air drifted through the rooms. Several coffee cans lined the windowsill. Inside them, tiny green shoots had begun pushing through the soil. You planted flowers? Grace smiled. I told Tyson spring begins in autumn if you're patient enough. Harrison leaned closer. Marigolds. And basil. You remembered. I did. Tyson proudly carried over the brown envelope. I kept it. Harrison accepted it carefully. Inside rested the pharmacy receipt, neatly folded. The envelope itself had become smoother from being handled so often. You really weren't going to throw it away? Tyson shook his head. It reminds me that finishing something feels better than quitting. Harrison smiled. I couldn't agree more. Grace looked curiously between them. I don't think either of you realizes what happened that evening. What do you mean? Tyson asked. She looked at Harrison. My son thought you helped him buy medicine. Then she looked at Tyson. But I think... She paused. You reminded this man why he built his life. Harrison stood quietly. There was nothing to add. Because she was right. Before leaving, he handed Grace a simple folder. What's this? A list of administrative positions opening through one of our community health partners. Grace looked surprised. You remembered I used to be a nursing assistant. I remember you also organized patient records, and scheduled appointments, and trained volunteers. She smiled. I wore many hats. They're looking for someone exactly like that. Grace looked uncertain. I've been away from work a long time. So had hope. He smiled gently. It still came back. After Harrison left, Tyson walked him to the apartment door. Can I ask you something? Of course. Did you really start that program because of me? Harrison thought carefully. No. Tyson looked confused. I started it because of thousands of people. He rested a hand lightly on Tyson's shoulder. But you were the first person who helped me finally see them. Tyson watched as Harrison walked down the hallway. He didn't fully understand the size of what had begun. He only knew that somewhere another child might never have to stand outside a pharmacy, wondering how to find $5 more. And for him, that was already more than enough. Winter returned to Cleveland faster than anyone expected. A light snowfall covered sidewalks, parked cars, and the small flower pots outside apartment 3B. The marigolds had long since faded, but the basil Grace had grown in an old coffee can still stood proudly on the kitchen windowsill. It's stubborn, Tyson said. Grace smiled. Something survived because they refused to give up. He looked at her. Like you. She laughed softly. I hope so. Much had changed in only a few months. Grace now worked 3 mornings each week as a patient services coordinator at one of Whitmore Health's community partner clinics. The position wasn't physically demanding. She greeted patients, helped complete paperwork, arranged appointments, and connected families with assistance programs. The work reminded her why she had entered healthcare years earlier. Not because she enjoyed paperwork, because she loved helping frightened people feel less alone. One snowy Tuesday morning, an elderly man entered the clinic holding a prescription and a worn wallet. Grace noticed his hesitation immediately. "Good morning." The man smiled politely. "I'm just looking. Can I help?" He looked embarrassed. "I think I'm a little short." Grace gently invited him to the consultation desk. Without making him feel uncomfortable, she reviewed his information. The balance remaining on his prescription was $6.12. Only $6. Months earlier, Grace would have known exactly how that felt. She smiled warmly. "Mr. Jenkins?" "Yes." "You're eligible?" "For what?" She pointed toward a small sign newly placed beside the reception desk. $5 forward. Prescription balance assistance. The elderly man's forehead wrinkled. "I've never heard of this." "It started recently." "What do I have to do?" "Just let us verify your prescription." A few minutes later, his medication was approved. He stared at the receipt. "I don't owe anything." "No." His eyes grew moist. "I was trying to decide whether I could wait another week." Grace's smile faded gently. "I'm glad you don't have to." As he left, she quietly touched the small name badge pinned to her sweater. Patient Services Coordinator. She thought about Tyson standing outside the pharmacy with a brown envelope. One child's determination had quietly reached people who would never know his name. Across town, Harrison visited one of the participating neighborhood pharmacies without announcing himself. He wanted to observe rather than be recognized. Emily Parker noticed him almost immediately. "You came to see it?" "I did." She pointed discreetly towards the counter. A young father stood there holding his toddler while speaking with another pharmacist. The man looked anxious. His daughter coughed weakly against his shoulder. After a brief conversation, the pharmacist smiled and printed a receipt. The father blinked. "That's it. You're all set." "I was short." "You qualified." He thanked her repeatedly before hurrying out with the medicine. Emily looked at Harrison. That would have been $8.40. Harrison watched through the window as the father buckled his daughter safely into an aging sedan. "No cameras. No speeches," Emily smiled. "Just medicine." Just medicine. For Harrison, those words had become enough. A month later, local hospitals began noticing something unexpected. Patients participating in the assistance program were more likely to complete follow-up care. Emergency admissions related to interrupted medication declined in several pilot neighborhoods. The changes were still small, but they were measurable. At a statewide healthcare conference, Harrison stood before physicians, pharmacists, and nonprofit leaders. The audience expected a presentation filled with financial charts and operational strategies. Instead, the first image projected onto the screen surprised everyone. A plain brown envelope, no logo, no names, only 3 handwritten words: Mom's Medicine. Harrison looked across the audience. "I won't tell you who wrote these words, because this story doesn't belong only to one family." He paused. "It belongs to every family that has ever been close. But not close enough." The room remained completely silent. He continued. "We often measure healthcare in billions of dollars. Millions of prescriptions. Thousands of hospital beds. But sometimes the distance between sickness and treatment," he looked again at the envelope, "is $5. No one applauded immediately. Many simply sat quietly reflecting. After the conference ended, several hospital administrators approached him. "We'd like to participate." "So would our clinic. Our pharmacy chain too." Within weeks, the pilot expanded into neighboring counties. Grace watched the news report that evening from her apartment. The television showed community pharmacies, clinics, and smiling healthcare workers. No patients appeared on camera. No dramatic interviews. Only the program itself. Tyson pointed excitedly. "That's your clinic." Grace smiled. "It is?" Then Harrison appeared briefly on the screen. A reporter asked, "What inspired the program?" He smiled politely before answering. "A family reminded me that healthcare begins by seeing people. And sometimes helping them finish what they've already started." He never mentioned Tyson's name. He never mentioned Grace. He kept his promise. Tyson quietly turned off the television. "Mom." "Yes." "Do you ever wish everyone knew what happened?" Grace looked toward the brown envelope displayed inside a simple picture frame on the bookshelf. "No." "Why not?" "Because the point was never to become famous." She looked at him. "The point was for people to receive help." Tyson nodded slowly. "I guess that's better." "It is." The following Saturday, Tyson and Grace visited Harrison at a community open house, celebrating the expansion of the assistance program. Children decorated paper snowflakes while volunteers served hot chocolate. Nothing about the event felt expensive. It felt welcoming. Harrison noticed them almost immediately. "You both look wonderful." Grace smiled. "I feel wonderful." "I can see that." Tyson grinned. "I'm taller." Harrison laughed. "You definitely are." As they talked, a little girl about 8 years old approached the information table with her grandmother. The child carried a prescription bag and looked worried. Grace recognized the expression instantly. She gently knelt beside her. "What's your name?" "Lily." "Are you okay?" The little girl nodded uncertainly. "Grandma thought we didn't have enough." Grace smiled. "Let's check together." Only a few minutes later, everything was resolved. The grandmother hugged Lily tightly. As they walked away, Tyson watched quietly. Then he looked at Harrison. "It keeps happening." Harrison nodded. "Yes." "But now," Tyson smiled, "they don't have to stand outside waiting." Harrison rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "No." "Thanks to a lot of good people." He looked directly at Tyson. "Right, and one very determined 11-year-old who refused to stop $5 short." Tyson smiled shyly. He still didn't think he had changed very much. But everywhere he looked that afternoon, strangers were leaving with something his mother had almost gone without. Hope. And this time it fit inside far more than a single brown envelope. 10 years passed. The seasons changed thousands of times. Coffee cans on Grace's windowsill were eventually replaced with a small backyard garden behind the modest townhouse she had been able to purchase through years of careful saving. The basil was still there. So were the marigolds. "Flowers don't care what they're planted in," she still liked to say. Some lessons deserved repeating. Tyson Cox was 21 years old. Tall, thoughtful, and calm in the same quiet way his mother had always been. People often noticed his patience before they noticed anything else. After graduating from college with a degree in public health administration, he accepted a position with the Whitmore Community Health Foundation. Not because Harrison offered it. In fact, Harrison had insisted Tyson apply through the normal hiring process. "If you're qualified," he had said, "you will earn it." Tyson had smiled. "I wouldn't want it any other way." Now he spent his days helping community clinics coordinate patient assistance programs across Ohio. His work rarely attracted attention. He preferred it that way. One snowy December afternoon, Tyson stopped at the same neighborhood pharmacy where everything had begun. Emily Parker still worked there. A few strands of gray now framed her hair, but her welcoming smile hadn't changed. "Look who's here." Tyson laughed. I was nearby. So you say that every month? I like visiting. Emily handed him a cup of coffee. You've grown into your mother. I've been told. They spoke for several minutes about Grace Dr. Foster and the continued expansion of $5 Forward. The program now operated in several states. Millions of dollars had been distributed, but Harrison always reminded his staff of one simple rule. Measure people helped, not money spent. As Tyson prepared to leave, raised voices near the pharmacy counter caught his attention. A young woman stood clutching a prescription bag. Beside her, a little boy, perhaps 9 years old, held her coat sleeve. I'm sorry, the pharmacist said gently. The insurance processed part of it. The remaining balance is $4.60. The woman searched every pocket of her purse, then counted several coins. She closed her eyes. I'm still short. The little boy quietly reached into his backpack. I have $2. His mother immediately shook her head. No. You've been saving that. I want Grandma to have her medicine. Tyson froze. The words carried him back through an entire decade. Another child, another family, another missing amount. Only the number had changed. He walked slowly toward the counter. Emily noticed him. Their eyes met briefly. Neither said a word. Tyson reached into his wallet. He removed a $5 bill. Not 10, not 20. Exactly 5. He placed it gently beside the woman's coins. She turned in surprise. Oh, no. We can't. Tyson smiled. I think you can. We'll pay you back. I don't need you to. The little boy stared at him. Really? Tyson nodded. Your mom has already done the hard part. He pointed toward the coins she had collected. She climbed almost the whole mountain. His voice softened. I'm only helping with the last step. For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. The same sentence after all these years. She remembered Harrison saying those exact words to an 11-year-old boy. The woman looked at Tyson with tears forming in her eyes. Thank you. He smiled gently. Someone once did the same thing for me. The little boy carefully watched him. When I grow up... He hesitated. I'll do it too. Tyson knelt so they were eye level. I hope you will. But first... He tapped the prescription bag. Take care of your grandma. As mother and son left with the medication, Emily walked over carrying something wrapped in brown paper. I've been saving this. Tyson looked puzzled. What is it? She unwrapped the package. Inside lay the original handwritten sign announcing the first day of $5 Forward at the pharmacy. The edges had yellowed slightly with age. We replaced it years ago. I couldn't throw this one away. She smiled. I thought maybe you'd appreciate it. Tyson accepted it carefully. I will. That evening he drove to Harrison's home. The billionaire was now nearing 70. His hair had turned completely silver. He worked fewer hours than before, but remained deeply involved with the foundation. When Tyson showed him the old pharmacy sign, Harrison smiled warmly. I remember that. So do I. They sat together, overlooking the frozen lake. You know, Harrison said quietly, people often ask what the greatest decision of my career was. The program. That's what they expect me to say. But it isn't. Tyson looked curious. What is it? Harrison smiled. Stopping my car. The answer surprised Tyson. If I hadn't stopped, Harrison looked toward the darkening horizon, I would have missed the most important teacher of my life. Tyson laughed. I was 11. Exactly. You reminded me that wisdom doesn't belong to age. Silence settled comfortably between them. Neither man felt the need to fill it. Finally, Harrison asked, Do you still have it? Tyson smiled. Of course. From a protective folder, he removed the old brown envelope, Mom's Medicine. The handwriting had faded slightly. The folds had become permanent. But the words remained clear. Harrison held it gently. I've seen thousands of awards. Lifetime achievement plaques. Honorary degrees. Business recognitions. He looked down at the envelope. I'd trade every one of them for this. Tyson smiled. I know. The next morning, Grace joined them for breakfast. She looked healthier than Tyson had ever remembered. Her medication had continued working. Her condition remained stable. She still volunteered twice a week, helping new patients navigate the healthcare system. As they finished eating, Harrison asked her something unexpected. Grace. Yes. Do you remember the first thing Tyson asked me? She smiled immediately. $5. No. He shook his head. The first thing. Grace thought for a moment. Then she remembered. Her eyes softened. He asked if you could spare $5. Harrison nodded, and without realizing it, he looked first at Grace, then at Tyson. Your son spared something much greater. What was that? My faith. He smiled quietly. In people. No one answered immediately, because some truths needed no response. Outside the dining room window, fresh snow began falling once again, just as it had on the evening when an 11-year-old boy had stood outside a pharmacy, holding a worn brown envelope. The snow looked different now, not because winter had changed, but because the people standing beneath it had. 25 years after the evening outside the pharmacy, the Whitmore Community Health Foundation occupied a bright brick building overlooking a public park in downtown Cleveland. Children laughed outside, while parents pushed strollers beneath rows of mature maple trees. Inside the foundation's lobby, visitors rarely paused first to admire the modern architecture. They stopped because of a simple display case near the entrance. There were no gold trophies, no framed magazine covers, no photographs of celebrities. Instead, under soft lighting rested an old brown envelope. Its edges had faded. Its folds had softened with time. Across the front, 3 handwritten words remained visible. Mom's Medicine. Beside it, a small plaque read, One family's determination reminded us that compassion is sometimes measured in only a few dollars. No names appeared. That decision had never changed. Visitors often asked the same question. Who wrote those words? The staff always smiled. What matters isn't who. It's what happened afterward. By then, Tyson Cox served as executive director of community programs. He had spent decades expanding partnerships among hospitals, neighborhood clinics, pharmacies, and nonprofit organizations. He was respected throughout the healthcare community, but he remained exactly the sort of man his mother had hoped he would become. He listened before speaking. He remembered names. He never hurried conversations with frightened families. Grace, now retired, still volunteered every Wednesday morning. She greeted visitors near the entrance, offered directions, and sometimes sat quietly with families waiting for appointments. She often noticed nervous children staring at the old envelope. One afternoon, a little girl tugged gently on her grandmother's sleeve. Grandma. Yes, sweetheart. Why is that old envelope in a glass box? The grandmother smiled uncertainly. I'm not sure. Grace walked over. Would you like me to tell you? The little girl nodded eagerly. It belonged to a boy. What happened? He loved his mother very much. The child smiled. Did she get better? Grace looked toward the display case. Yes, because people chose kindness. The little girl seemed satisfied. Sometimes that simple answer was enough. Later that day, Tyson met Harrison in the foundation's quiet courtyard. Age had slowed Harrison's walk, but it had not dimmed the warmth in his eyes. A cane now accompanied him everywhere. Tyson automatically slowed his own pace to match. I hear another hospital joined. They did. That makes 42, Harrison smiled. Daniel would have liked that. Tyson nodded. He still remembered hearing about Harrison's younger brother all those years ago. The promise made beside a hospital bed had become something far greater than either of them could have imagined. They sat together beneath a large oak tree overlooking the park. Families passed by without recognizing the elderly man who had helped reshape access to medications across several states. Harrison preferred it that way. Do you know my favorite part? He asked. The foundation? No. The envelope? No. Tyson laughed. Then what? Harrison pointed toward the park. A volunteer stood beside a folding table, distributing information about community clinics. Nearby, several former patients chatted happily with nurses who had once cared for them. My favorite part, he smiled quietly, is that kindness became ordinary. Tyson followed his gaze. Nobody there appeared extraordinary. No one expected applause. People simply helped because helping had become normal. I think that's success, Harrison said. Before Tyson could answer, Linda Evans approached carrying several folders. Though long retired as Harrison's executive assistant, she still volunteered during major foundation events. Sorry to interrupt. You never interrupt, Harrison replied. She handed Tyson a report. The annual numbers. Tyson opened the folder. He had reviewed countless reports over the years, but this one always affected him. Millions of prescriptions completed. Hundreds of thousands of families assisted. Emergency hospitalization rates reduced in participating communities. Improved medication adherence. Expanded community partnerships. Important numbers. Meaningful numbers. Yet Tyson closed the report after only a few pages. Still not your favorite statistics? Linda asked. He smiled. You know me too well. She laughed. I thought so. She reached into another folder. This one arrived this morning. Inside lay dozens of handwritten thank you letters, children's drawings, holiday cards, simple notes. One letter written in uneven handwriting by a teenage boy caught Tyson's attention. It read, My grandma got her medicine because your program paid the last $6. She's teaching me how to cook now. Thank you. Tyson smiled silently. No financial report could compete with that. That evening, the foundation hosted a small anniversary gathering. Employees, volunteers, pharmacists, physicians, and community partners filled the auditorium. No television cameras attended, no politicians gave speeches, only people who had quietly built something meaningful together. Harrison insisted on speaking briefly. He slowly approached the podium. The audience stood to applaud. He gently motioned for them to sit. I've spoken at many conferences. I've attended countless business dinners. I've accepted awards I probably didn't deserve. Soft laughter filled the room. But tonight, he paused. I'd rather tell you about an 11-year-old boy. The audience grew silent. He believed that accepting help wasn't the same as giving up. He believed finishing something mattered. And without realizing it, Harrison looked toward Tyson sitting beside Grace in the front row. He taught an old businessman that compassion doesn't replace effort. It honors it? Grace quietly reached for Tyson's hand. Harrison continued. We often imagine history changing through grand decisions. Sometimes it does. But sometimes, he smiled. History changes because someone stops walking, listens, and offers $5. When the applause ended, Harrison stepped away from the podium. He never mentioned his own accomplishments. Instead, he walked directly toward the display case. For several moments, he simply looked at the brown envelope. The same envelope that had once held coins carefully counted by a frightened little boy. Tyson joined him. So many people ask why we never replaced it. Harrison smiled. Because new things aren't always more valuable. He gently rested one hand against the glass. This reminds us where everything began. Tyson nodded. And where it always should. The old envelope no longer represented one family's struggle. It had become a quiet promise that whenever possible, no one should have to stop just a few dollars short of hope. Several years later, on a quiet spring morning, the doors of the Whitmore Community Health Foundation opened, as they always did. Volunteers greeted visitors with warm smiles. Pharmacists met with community partners. Families filled out paperwork. Children colored at a small activity table near the lobby windows. Nothing about the day seemed unusual. The Tyson often thought was the greatest success of all. Compassion had become routine. He walked through this building as he had thousands of times before stopping to greet employees by name. Morning, Maria. Good morning, Mr. Cox. How's your grandson? He made the baseball team. That's wonderful. A little farther down the hallway, Dr. Benjamin Foster, now retired, but still volunteering twice a month, finished speaking with a young physician. When he saw Tyson, he smiled. I still remember a frightened 11-year-old asking if his mother would be okay. Tyson laughed softly. I remember a doctor who stayed after closing. Dr. Foster shrugged. I only stayed an extra hour. It changed my life. The older doctor looked around the busy foundation. No. He smiled. It changed more than yours. Before Tyson could answer, Grace appeared carrying a tray of coffee for the volunteers. Her hair had turned silver, but her eyes remained bright. She no longer hurried anywhere. She no longer needed to. She placed a cup into Dr. Foster's hands. You've both skipped breakfast again. Tyson smiled. Some things never change. Grace looked toward the lobby. No. They simply become easier. As the morning continued, a school group arrived for a community service tour. 20 middle school students followed their teacher through the building, learning about healthcare access volunteer work and neighborhood partnerships. Eventually, they stopped in front of the familiar display case. One boy raised his hand. Why is everyone looking at that old envelope? The teacher smiled. Maybe someone here can answer. Tyson stepped forward. He didn't mention his own name. Instead, he looked at the children. Imagine someone you love is sick. The room became quiet. You work as hard as you possibly can. You save almost everything you need. But when you're finally standing at the pharmacy, he paused. You're still $5 short. Several students lowered their eyes. That envelope belonged to a child who refused to quit. He believed that asking for help after giving everything he had wasn't weakness. It was courage. Another student raised her hand. What happened to him? Tyson smiled. He grew up. Did he become rich? A few children giggled. Tyson shook his head. He became useful. The room grew silent again. And that's much more important. The teacher thanked him as the students continued their tour. One little girl lingered behind. She stared at the envelope for another moment before quietly asking, Do you think I can help people like that someday? Tyson smiled exactly the way Harrison once had. I don't think. I know. Late that afternoon, Tyson walked into Harrison's office. The room had changed very little over the years. Books lined the shelves. Family photographs stood beside framed foundation milestones. Near the window sat Harrison, reading. Age had slowed him considerably, but his mind remained as sharp as ever. You look thoughtful, Harrison said. I met a little girl today. What did she ask? If she could help people someday. Harrison smiled. And what did you tell her? The truth. Good. They sat together in comfortable silence. Finally, Harrison reached into his desk drawer. I've been waiting to give you something. He removed a small wooden box. Inside lay the original business card he had handed Tyson outside the pharmacy decades earlier. Its edges were worn. The ink had faded. I kept it, Harrison said. Tyson looked surprised. I thought I was the one keeping souvenirs. Harrison chuckled. We both did. He handed Tyson the card. Take it. I can't. You can. You've earned it. Tyson accepted it carefully. On the back, written in Harrison's handwriting many years earlier, were 6 simple words. Thank you for stopping me that day. Tyson's eyes filled with emotion. I thought you stopped for me. I did, Harrison smiled gently. But you stopped me from becoming too busy to notice people. As evening settled over the city, Tyson left the office carrying the old business card. Before going home, he paused one last time in front of the display case. The building had grown quiet. Only the soft lighting remained. He looked at the brown envelope, then at the visitors quietly reading the small plaque. No one knew the boy's name. No one knew the mother's face. No one knew the billionaire who had stopped his car. The story had become bigger than all of them. Grace joined him a few moments later. What are you thinking? Tyson smiled. I'm thinking about how strange life is. How so? If I had found $5 more that day, Grace nodded slowly. You never would have asked. And if I never asked, she finished the thought for him. Someone never would have stopped. Together they stood quietly for another moment. Outside, through the glass entrance doors, a young father held the door open for an elderly woman using a walker. A volunteer hurried over to help her inside. No one had asked him to. He simply noticed. Grace smiled. There it is again. What? The real miracle. Tyson watched the small act of kindness. It spreads. Yes. Kindness almost always does. Before leaving for the night, Tyson unlocked the display case for its scheduled preservation inspection. He carefully lifted the old envelope with white cotton gloves. The paper felt impossibly light, yet it had carried the weight of an entire future. He unfolded it one final time. Inside remained the original pharmacy receipt. Nothing else. The $5 bill was long gone. It had been spent exactly as intended, but somehow it had never stopped giving. Tyson carefully returned the receipt to its place, folded the envelope exactly as it had been decades before, closed the glass case, turned off the lobby lights. As he stepped outside, the evening breeze carried the scent of newly blooming flowers from the garden Grace had helped plant near the entrance. Marigolds. Flowers that never cared what they were planted in. He smiled. Some gifts disappear the moment they are given. Others continue growing in lives the giver will never meet. A little boy once believed he was only trying to buy medicine for his mother. Instead, he helped build a future where countless families no longer had to stop just a few dollars short of hope. And perhaps that is how the greatest acts of kindness always begin. Not with extraordinary people, but with ordinary people who choose in one quiet moment to notice someone else. Every great change in the world begins with a choice so small that most people would never notice it. Tyson believed he was simply trying to find $5 more to buy medicine for his mother. Harrison believed he was simply stopping to listen to a frightened little boy. Neither of them could have imagined that one ordinary conversation would one day help thousands of families receive the care they desperately needed. This story reminds us that kindness is never measured by the size of the gift, but by the sincerity of the heart behind it. Sometimes the greatest miracle isn't becoming wealthy or powerful. It is refusing to walk past someone who needs compassion. We may not all have millions to give, but every one of us has the ability to notice, to listen, to encourage, and to offer hope when someone feels they have reached the end of the road. A few kind words, a helping hand, or even a few dollars given at the right moment can change the direction of a life forever. And when kindness inspires kindness, its impact reaches people we may never meet. That is how ordinary people create extraordinary legacies. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a small act of kindness that changed your life? Or been the person who made a difference for someone else? Share your story in the comments below, because your experience may inspire someone who needs hope today. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about compassion, resilience, and the power of ordinary people changing lives, please subscribe to our channel and join us for more unforgettable journeys. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind the world that kindness still matters.